Hello guys, if you like this episode, please send me a message. I would love hearing from you. You can also follow us at the Neurophania Pod on Instagram. Thank you and enjoy. Hello, my beautiful Neurophaniers. Welcome to one more episode of the Neurophania podcast. Our guest today, Dr. Rolly McCratty, PhD, is the Director of Research at the Heart Institute and a professor at Florida Atlantic University. McCratty is a psychophysiologist whose interests include the physiology of emotion. One of his primary areas of focus is the mechanisms by which emotions influence cognitive processes, behavior, health, and the global interconnectivity between people and Earth's energetic system. His critical research on heart rate variability and heart rhythm coherence has gained international attention in the scientific community and is helping to change long-held perceptions about the heart's role in health, behavior, performance, and quality of life. Thank you, Dr. McCratty, for being here and welcome.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, I would like to get to start to know a little bit more about your background and how is that you became interested and why for you this is so important, the topic that you research about.
Oh, that's kind of a long story, but I was originally, well, as a very young child, was always interested in electricity, right? And radios and transmitters and things. And so that ended up being my original career. So I used to, my first, well, I've had too many lives, I guess, this life, but was a communication engineer for Motorola eventually. And so did that and then became a serial entrepreneur in a number of different areas that all successful. And it was really through that work, one of my adventures, I guess. I don't know if you've ever heard of spirulina, but I got interested through my research and wanting to really understand deeper what electromagnetics really were. We're really good about writing formulas that describe their behavior, like a magnetic field or electric field and things. But when I would always ask the question, well, what is it actually, really? Nobody could answer that question, and always gives me, we'd always talk about the formula that described its behavior. So anyway, I was following that rabbit down the hole. Got me interested in different books I would read and things that sort of got me into the study of consciousness. Is where that ultimately went. And so consciousness, I know not sure who your listeners are, but one of my mentors ended up was a guy named Carl Pribram, very famous guy in neurosciences. Carl Pribram. Yeah. Considered the father of modern cognitive neuroscience. But so he became a very close friend and hung out a lot here at HeartMath, actually. And anyway, so I can be careful here. I'll take too many sidetracks, but basically there's big C consciousness, right? And then little c consciousness is the way Carl liked to talk about it. Little c being the kind of scientists that neuroscientists talk about. I'm conscious when I'm awake and unconscious when I'm asleep, and big C consciousness. The information that organizes, systems and us and the universe potentially. Anyway, so I ended up moving to California. This was in the 1970s, late 1970s, and got a degree in consciousness studies at one of the first accredited degree granting institutions for that kind of work. And through that, got involved in more humanitarian type stuff. And one of the things I was involved in was, it's a long answer to your question, but it's still a short answer. Spirulina. So I don't know if you've ever heard of spirulina.
I have it. I drink it.
All right. Well, I was with the group that first introduced it to the Western world.
Wow.
And the motive back then was a superfood that could actually feed the world's hungry populations. That was really the motive behind all of that original work. And anyway, an event happened that a pretty magazine that has a lot of power to move people did a front page story cover story on spirulina. And we sold millions of dollars worth of it over a very short time period. And this is back in the early 80s. So we took those profits and went to the deserts of Southern California, out in the middle of the desert, and built a completely self-contained farm for growing and processing spirulina. And way ahead of our time. I mean, it's all solar powered, sprayed, these big spray dryers, 3-story high things. And it actually proved that you could go to the middle of a desert and grow this spirulina stuff and feed hungry people. And that went nowhere.
Okay.
And that's where I, in hindsight, say my idealism bubble got popped. You know, somebody back in my 30s at that time, and where I became to realize that it wasn't about technology. That wasn't the block. That wasn't the issue. We had it. It worked. It was relatively straightforward. It was more people didn't want people fed. It was all the political blocks and all the other issues is the reason it didn't go anywhere. And that's still today. So that's, you know, even though back then I would say, well, it's all about consciousness and stuff. That's when the penny dropped for me. And I really understood at a much deeper visceral level that no, it really is about consciousness. And so basically I said, I'll screw this humanitarian stuff. I'm going to go make money again. So I started another company and became pretty successful. And then through that period, great life. I mean, a very successful company. But something deeper in me was still yearning to do something more about what I feel I'm here about, which is to really help raise consciousness. But anyway, I vowed that I wouldn't get involved in anything if it really couldn't help move consciousness in a very practical way at a mass scale. So anyway, I was at a point where another sports car in the driveway wasn't really going to do it for me, for my own fulfillment. And that's when I met, through some other friends, a guy named Doc Childry, who's the founder of Heart Math. And that I really resonated with what he had to share and his background and work, and we became very good friends. And so I tried some of the principles that this is before Heart Math existed as Heart Math, of course, in my own company, my own life, and my own company, and can honestly say I made more growth in the ways that count in probably a 3-month period than I had in many, many years, probably 15 years of meditation type practices. So I followed my own heart, sold that company, and helped join with some others to help Doc Childry found Heart Math.
Yeah. So, wow, you have mentioned like at least 3 different concepts that I really would like to pull. First, yes, the spirulina, definitely you were researching about, I guess, the physiopathologic mechanism of connection, which is has something to do maybe with the grounding physiology.
No, which problem?
Could that physiology of behind the spirulina has something to do with the grounding physiology?
Are you talking about spirulina?
Spirulina, yeah, exchange of electrons in our systems with the plants and the earth.
Well, sort of. I mean, I guess. I mean, this is a long time ago. This is 30 plus years ago that I was involved in that. I've about, I learned all kinds of stuff about.
And second, yeah, you really mentioned a thing like many times. We want to create like an outcome in the world, and of course on a structural level still there are, thanks God, there are companies or non-profits that they do great field work. But I did also understood that at some point that really the thing that is gonna change the planet for better values is consciousness.
Absolutely. So I'll give you a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that, and also, yeah, definitely, even for me to start even applying even more in my life, like I do have noticed the difference when we focus in our heart versus other type of meditations. And I did wanted to ask you, what's your level of consciousness or spirituality at that time, and then how that changed for you when you started to do more heart-based meditations.
Yeah, I'm going to just share one other thing that is a kind of a modern version of the problem of consciousness. So I used to say, because I'd read this, that, in some what I thought were references and sources, that with 10% of the world's military budget, that every person, every man, woman, and child on the whole planet Earth, could have clean water, fed, housed, and educated.
Yeah.
Right. As it turns out, I finally met the person who's really done the math on it, and I was wrong. It's actually far less than 10% of the world's military budget that could be done with.
So
So in other words, for less than 10% of what we spend on bombs and war, every person on earth could be fed and have housing and be educated.
yeah,
So this is a problem in consciousness, not a problem in technology, right?
absolutely. Yeah, I saw today like an image like how, I mean, I believe it. I'm gonna just say here, like I believe poverty is created in some way. So poverty is handmade, is man-made. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's my perception.
Yeah. So
So
anyway, it was really when I met Doc Childrey that I said that I had my own personal experience and also cognitive understanding that here's was something that really could shift consciousness, which has to do with the heart. So that got me into helping him found HeartMath, and then I would guess I was kind of the obvious choice. So that I brought some of the people with me in my company to start the HeartMath Research Center. And so then I had to go learn about bodies and physiology and electrocardiograms and all this stuff. And eventually got a PhD in psychophysiology. And in fact, I was just awarded a
oh,
PhD for my lifetime career work so far, which is kind of a neat honor from Ubiquity University. So,
oh, I
uh,
see.
yeah, anyway.
So let's talk a little bit more. Like, let's say the listener, which maybe they haven't listened about the HeartMath Institute. What is the HeartMath? Which are their values, and a little bit the research you guys do.
Yeah. Well, research is pretty broad. We've been at this for 30 years now plus, and so the research is in really three primary kind of categories or domains that we call personal coherence. So about the coherence within our mind, heart, brain, body, and many years of work in that, and to kind of introduce the term heart coherence and physiological coherence into the scientific literature. And that really has to do with teaching people very simple, practical techniques that allow them to shift their physiology into what we call a heart coherent state. And this is a very clear, well-defined state. And we have even technology now that will feed that back and measure it. And
Mm-hmm.
there are now, over 400 independent studies, independent of our own research and basic research and work that have shown how teaching people how to shift into heart coherence has, 400 studies. You can imagine a pretty broad range of applications in many different populations. And these studies are all around the world, including some in Spain, by the way, which I know is your native home. Um, Everything from improved health outcomes, whether it's heart failure, diabetes, asthma, blood pressure control, but also many of them in education, in the social side, helping people get along better.
Yeah.
So a broad range of studies all over the world now. So long story short, this is where a picture's worth 1,000 words, but a coherent state is an optimal state in terms of our own physiological and mental functioning and emotional stability. Now, then the second category is social coherence. That's where we're doing a lot more work now in. So that has to do with what's the alignment and the connections between the people, how coherent or harmonious is that group. And that could be a family, it can be a work team, a class, a classroom of students, or a community, or even a nation or country. So we're developing new programs and interventions and even technology to help facilitate social coherence. And then the third category, to answer your question, is global coherence, what we call global coherence, which I
Yeah.
know was one of your interests. And that's looking at, easiest way to say it is the interactions and the communication at a global scale between humanity and the earth itself, the earth's energetic or magnetic systems. So
Yeah. I mean, I am very personally interested in the heart coherence at a personal level and the health and the effect that that can have in health. But I was interested in the global coherence because it's such an important topic right now. We are seeing so much polarization in society that bigger understanding of that is really important. So if I had to ask you like 2 examples of research, a little bit more specific about global coherence and also about heart coherence at a personal level, because could you share with us some examples of studies, for example?
Pick one. I mean, the main thing I would share, rather than a specific study, and there's review documents on this. If people that really want to get into a lot of the specific studies and specific outcomes, if you just go to the heartmap.org website, there's one of my books called Science of the Heart that has chapters on studies in organizations and schools and education and healthcare, things like that. That would be a much better, I think, use of time than me trying to go through the details of a specific outcome study. But probably more relevant would be to understand some basic physiology here. So in our, and you're a neuroscience student, is that correct? You're in the neurosciences?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a neuroscientist.
So you know what the autonomic nervous system is, obviously, then. And
excuse me?
The autonomic nervous system.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Very familiar with that, I'm sure. So most people are aware of the two branches, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Mm-hmm. And then we think of it as the brain sending signals down to the body, which it does. However, if what people don't tend to understand, and what actually is left out of a lot of even current medical texts, is the actual fact that it goes both ways, right? Mm-hmm. So you have what are called the efferent, or the descending pathways.
And the afferent.
But there's more afferent, far more afferents, especially if we look at the parasympathetic or the vagus nerves. If you're conservative, people would say 80%, most say 90% of all the fibers in the vagus nerves, which is our parasympathetic, main nerve of the parasympathetic system, are actually taking information from the body to the brain.
Right? Well, can I just briefly, so basically what the basics that I learned about this afferents is about very physiological. The afferents nerves collect information about gut feeling, gut, the food, how it's feeling, right. So to regulate the digestion, heart rate, baroreceptors in the carotid artery.
Correct.
And little more. And proprioception as well. Well, proprioception is more like an motor pathways, but little more than that. Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah. That's what I wanted to.
Yeah. So if you've got 80, really 90% of the, the vagus nerves are huge, right? They're the longest nerves in the body.
Huge.
Thousands of neural fibers in each one. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows exactly how many, but well over at least 3,000 neural pathways in each of the two vagus nerves. And you got 80, 90% of those nerves going back this way. So yeah, there's some from the gut, and the gut, feelings, but the majority of those nerves, those afferent nerves, by the way, this sympathetic side also has afferents as well. It's not just an efferent system. Mm-hmm. So it's both sympathetic and parasympathetic. So the majority of those are coming from the heart and cardiovascular system. Mm-hmm. So you just mentioned a couple little minor, well, not minor, but in areas like the aortic arch and
vital, but
yeah, but that's very rounded off, and the complexity of that afferent information is very complex. So the heart is sending far more information from the brain to the brain than the brain sending to the heart, and the heart's way more than like the gut or any other gland organ in the body that's being sent upstairs. Mm-hmm. Now there are direct neural pathways, once it gets to the brainstem, the medulla, and NTS, and all that go directly to pretty much every brain center in the brain. So you probably wouldn't have learned this in school, but a very famous hypothesis used to be, it's confirmed now many years ago, in my field, psychophysiology, was that the heart has a causal role in modulating perception. In perception, brain function.
Okay.
And I even did this before in a way that somehow the heart knew what the brain was going to need to do next and prepared it to be in its optimal state.
Intuition.
Before the brain knew it, right?
So we are talking about intuition now.
We've taken that way farther, but I'm just saying this goes back to the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, these observations I'm talking about now.
Oh, okay. It would be interesting to see those initial studies from the 70s
Yeah,
and
well,
80s.
yeah, read some of my papers. I've reviewed the history and all the references in some of my old
Definitely looking
papers.
into.
Um, anyway, they introduced two terms, not me, this is long before I came along back then, to describe the effects that the activity of the heart was having on brain function. And one of those terms is called cortical inhibition. You know, cortex is inhibited, doesn't work well, right? Or cortical facilitation. In other words, we enhance cortical facilitation.
Okay.
So when our work came along, we started looking at the physiological correlates of different emotional states, right? Like
Okay.
what are the changes in the nervous system, and you know, things like skin conductance and heart rate and brain waves, and you know, all the stuff that is how we started to kind of start getting our lab going. However, because of some of our own intuitive insights into the heart, we took a little bit deeper look at the heart. And what we ended up finding was that what now called heart rate variability. So we were looking at heart rate variability before it was called heart rate variability. So
Okay.
that gives you my age here. That's been around a long time. We found that the patterns in the rhythm, basically you could think of it as the heart rhythm, which is the beat to beat change in heart rate. So our heart rate's changing with every heartbeat. And that's the measurement of that's called heart rate variability. That different emotions have very different signatures in the rhythm of the heart.
Okay.
So,
And they were consistent?
well, there's individual differences, but also a consistency across people.
Oh, interesting.
But you know, but anxiety looks different than anger, you know, for example, so on. But where they really took a different direction, unexpected, is when people were experiencing feelings like love, compassion, kindness, actually heartfelt feelings, not mental constructs, not thinking it. That does very little. But you actually feel it. The heart shifted into a completely different mode, then that's what we call heart coherence. A very different rhythmic pattern that was quite distinguished from, you know, what we would call depleting emotions, you know, the impatience and fear and anger and so on. So I'm just giving you kind of some history here. And
Yeah, it's interesting. So my understanding is that you were studying patterns of different emotions and the electrocardiogram, and at some point you realized that the heart-based emotions like love and compassion and kindness, all these different emotions actually had like a coherence pattern.
yeah, exactly.
And moving forward, did you were able to observe a specific cortical neural pathways modifications
Yeah,
upon those
right. Yeah, exactly.
basal?
Exactly. And well, not just us, as it turns out, there's a lot of people who've been looking at this for a long time and working out the mechanisms. Our work is kind of built on the shoulders of some really good researchers who've done a lot of the heavy lifting in the past.
Yep.
So I, you know, credit due there. But yes, so the mechanisms then, at that time, again, this is the early 1990s, you know, when we were doing the work I'm talking about now, we didn't really understand why and this would be true, but we were seeing it. And then as the years unfolded and we really come to understand much more about the physiology and the way we're really wired, it all became clear and made total sense. So for example, so as I mentioned, you have the afferents coming up and they go to all the brain centers. One of the ones they go to is the amygdala, or amygdalas, we should say, because there's two of them. In fact, the core nucleus of the amygdalas are literally synchronized to the heartbeat.
Which the amygdala, for the listener, the amygdala is the main center of fear of the reptilian brain. It's not the same.
No. And I know that literature. In fact, again,
please correct me.
Yeah. So Dr. Preben, one of my close friends and mentors, he's one of the people who mapped out the limbic system originally at Stanford. And one of the things that used to really upset him was when people would say the amygdala is the fear center.
Okay. I don't want to upset Dr. Prima.
So what the amygdala really does at a functional level is determine what is familiar and what is not familiar.
Oh, actually, this is even more interesting.
Right. It's familiar, not familiar. Now, this is a whole other story. We could spend a whole interview talking about this. So if to do that, it has to have a reference pattern that it's always comparing the current inputs to what we're hearing, seeing, smelling from the external world. But it's also another part of the amygdala is doing the same thing, familiar, not familiar, from the body's interoceptive systems. The heart rhythms, the breathing rhythms, the hormonal patterns are also all in the background. So the amygdala is always comparing the now to the familiar reference and looking at the match or mismatch. Now, if you've got something that's really unfamiliar that you don't have a reference to, yes, that can trigger fear or anxiety.
This is great because this is making be just encouraging for people, listeners, and also for us to understanding why we get scared about new things.
Exactly.
And we don't want to try, or when somebody presents us some ideas, concepts, or opportunities that are just not familiar, it comes to where we first feel fear, and then also we even judge them or feel rejection because of this.
So unfamiliar, this is a really important understanding of how the brain actually works at a functional level, and this, especially this level of brain function, because it explains so many things. It's why we don't like change, because what is familiar, like when the input matches the familiar baseline, that's what we perceive and as comfortable. Right? So unfamiliar or change from the familiar, the brain doesn't like it. So have you ever run into people who, well, we've always done it this way, no need to change, right?
Yeah.
Right? Or you go to a new area that's unfamiliar, you're on guard until it becomes familiar. But also why we form in-group, out-group, right? You're not this, you don't think like I do. You're the out group. You're not my family. You're the out group. You're not, you're a different political party. You're the out group. I'm only comfortable with my in group.
I guess that we need,
right?
Yeah, I guess that we need to increase amygdala awareness.
Yes. Well,
we need to be more aware of amygdala. Okay, this is my amygdala. It's not me. I am gonna give an opportunity, even though my amygdala is saying no, because.
Right.
That's great.
So now here's another important part. I mean, I had no idea where our conversation was going to go, but this is really important.
Please.
As I mentioned, the amygdala has to do its job to compare, to determine what's familiar, not familiar from the external world, the sensory systems, or the body's internal sensory systems, especially the heart, by the way. It has to have this reference, and that's what Dr. Pribram called the familiar reference, the familiar baseline reference pattern. And these are actual real patterns in the neural architecture, repeating neural patterns. So if somebody is in a situation where they're let's say they're under a lot of stress long enough, that becomes the familiar.
Oh, yes. Actually, yes.
You got it, right?
Just today I had an experience about it, not personal, but so.
Yeah, right. So then the brain's going to do everything because a match to the familiar is comfortable. As crazy as that sounds, right? Right. But so, and this explains so much. Now, here's a really important thing, or it could give me anxiety. In fact, I had a grandmother when I was a small kid that she worried. In her world, if she wasn't worried about us grandkids, she wasn't caring about us. Right. So her baseline was one of constant worry.
Yeah.
And she had to be worrying to feel comfortable, as nuts as that sounds, but it's true. But it's why we keep repeating the same inefficient patterns and things we do in life.
Yeah.
So there's no such thing as change, sustained change, without shifting the baseline.
Okay.
And once we do that, it becomes automatic and transformational if it's a more coherent baseline.
Okay, so two things about this. Yes, so today actually I was told by somebody because this person was worried about some change in medication that triggered some anxiety, but well, I had normal anxiety so some people like normalize anxiety or normalize stress.
Right. It
And,
becomes,
and
it's familiar, right? It's just the way it is.
exactly. And then the next thing is how can we actually create, because if the root cause somehow is in the amygdala patterns to normalize anxiety, how can we modify the neural circuits of the
All right.
amygdala
That is the perfect
to
question.
make it not normal anymore, so that we go
Yeah,
back to our
right.
basal level?
That is the most important question you could have asked me. Because like, as I said, there's no such thing as to change, as to sustain it without establishing a new baseline reference that the brain takes off from.
Wow.
It's kind of like why New Year's resolutions never work out, right? I'm going to do so-and-so, but you've got the old pattern.
Okay.
You haven't shifted it, so they, hardly ever we follow through on them. Same thing. So Dr. Pribram actually proved this in his lab. I mean, he's, like I said, a very, very famous neuroscientist that did a lot of the original work of mapping out what's called the limbic system and the amygdala. He was actually one of the first neurosurgeons in the world.
Yeah.
Ever. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to go too much into him, but he actually proved that the only way you can establish a baseline reference at the amygdala and its associated neural structures was to change the afferent input from the heart to the brain. We proved this. So in other words, you cannot think yourself into a new baseline, at least not directly.
Okay. Wow. This is so powerful and special for me for many reasons.
Yeah. So getting into a coherent heart state, you're increasing vagal afferent traffic, but the more important than that, it's in an ordered, coherent pattern going directly to the amygdala. So if we practice being in that coherent state regularly enough, even a couple times a day for even a few minutes over a few weeks, that establishes that as a new inner reference. And that's actually when this work becomes transformational and it starts increasing people's consciousness and awareness.
Wow. Like we really need to stress this a lot, is all starts in the heart, because actually, so according to this, is really the heart center meditations that what really changes the physiopathology on the brain and not the other way around. Right. And the other day I experienced this in a personal level, because I usually did meditations like focusing my brain. And for some reason, this time I started to do meditation focusing my heart. And I started to notice this is better. Like I started to notice changes like immediately, like from more heart center meditations. And now this actually provides like a physiopathology mechanism behind the reason. So it's very cool. And yes, so I wanted to be a neurosurgeon for a long time myself. So I'm a fan for, like, I have read some of the Dr. Priestman's work, but I didn't know about.
It's unusual that someone as young as you would even know who Dr. Pribram is, let alone.
Oh, for neurosurgery. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like neurosurgery freak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he was a very, very close friend of mine and spent a lot of time here.
Wow. That's impressive. I will have to ask you more questions later.
I have a lot of Dr. Pribram stories, but that's another time, probably not publicly.
Wow, I'm so impressed. So now I would like to ask you, before we go into the global coherence, can you tell a little bit about the quantum entanglement and that research of 2011 of DNA? I know that was not exactly your name on the group, but maybe you could talk about it.
I don't know if that's that relevant. I mean, probably not. I mean, I could, but I don't. I mean, if what would be really helpful for people, it's interesting, but I don't know that it's that.
Yeah, and we covered it in another previous interview. So now going back to global coherence.
Okay.
Can you, the similar concept that you just share for the heart, could you bring us back to the?
Sure. I'm going to start though, back to the heart.
Yeah.
All right. So when you put electrodes across the chest, right, what are you measuring?
You are measuring the cells magnetic field.
Well, what's it called? Let's just go simple.
It's an electrocardiogram.
Electrocardiogram.
Okay,
right.
yeah.
So it's called the electrocardiogram because we're measuring electricity.
Yep.
Right. In fact, the heart, clearly the largest source of electricity in the body. Orders of magnitude greater than brain waves. Right. Measured in millivolts rather than microvolts. I mean, it's orders of magnitude huge, big. So whether we're putting electrodes on the brain to measure brain waves, EEGs, or across the chest to measure the electrocardiogram, the ECG, we're measuring current. We are actually measuring current flow.
Current flow, yeah, of electrons through the membrane. And
which are produced by the, all the cells contracting together in the heart together, that, and all the ion channels, but basically gives current flow.
Okay.
Now, basic physics, we know that whenever you have a flow of current, you generate a magnetic field, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now here's where my ex-communication engineer knowledge comes in handy, because that's what I used to do for a living, was use electromagnetic fields to carry information. I was a top-level support engineer for Motorola. I'd go out in big transmission systems and things, transmitters and things. So people don't always understand that electric fields and magnetic fields are very different. They're not the same thing.
Okay.
And one of the properties of magnetic fields is they go through things.
Yeah.
Right. That's why your cell phone works indoors, right? Because we're using the electromagnetic field as a carrier to carry the information, your voice or the picture, your text, whatever. Right. So the point of all this is that when the magnetic field produced by the heart easily radiates out into the space around us. So I'm not talking about an aura here, or something that how do I know this? We can measure it. And you measure it with a device called a magnetometer, right? So the electrodes don't see the magnetic field, they just see current flow, right? So to measure the magnetic field, you use a magnetometer. In fact, you're at Mayo Clinic, you probably have a device right there that measures the heart's magnetic field. It's called MCG, magnetocardiogram.
I have not asked.
Yeah, I know, but the larger and especially teaching hospitals all have these things. It's not, a lot of people think I'm crazy when I'm talking about the heart has a magnetic field. Well, not really. Most people know I'm not crazy, and I'm a pretty grounded scientist.
Yeah, but it's not really known over there for some reason. It's not.
Yeah, but like I say, it's done all the time. Magnetocardiograms. There's a name for it, and there's instruments in most larger hospitals that have them.
And it's not that crazy to understand if our heart is an electrical somehow machine mechanism. Makes totally sense that generates a magnetic field. It's like obvious.
Well, of course it does. Yes, right.
It's like makes sense.
Yeah, but of course, when you're trying to measure for diagnostic reasons, you get the sensors close to the body. When you're measuring a magnetic field, they don't touch the body; they're external, right? So because you're measuring the field, not the current flow. So if you take today's magnetometers and you can start backing up the sensor till you see how far away from the body before you lose, the capacity to see a good signal. Okay. With the cardiac field, it's about 3 feet away from the body.
The heart, 3 feet.
Yeah, the heart signal, the magnetocardiogram, as it would be called. You lose sensitivity to measure a brain wave about 1 inch away from the head.
Yeah.
So feet versus inch, right? So you start seeing how energetically the heart is by far the big player here.
Yeah, that was a disappointment. I am a brain person.
Well,
but I have to admit that the heart makes a better job on that.
I don't take away from the brain. I'm glad I've got one, and I want it to work really well.
Yeah.
So I'm not down on the brain. Don't get me wrong.
I'm still joking.
I know, but when we get coherent, the brain is the big winner.
Yeah.
Right. So, but the reason I'm sharing this is because I'm going to take you into global coherence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so step 2 in that line of research, this is ancient history for me. So using the same kind of techniques I would have used back at Motorola to decode or demodulate the information being carried by the field, we can apply them right to the very same way to the heart's field. And what you can clearly see is that the magnetic field of the heart is carrying information relative to our emotional state. So you can literally see different vibrational patterns being carried by the heart. In fact, we can tell with about 75% accuracy a person's emotional state just by looking at the field, the information carried by the field.
So basically, the heart magnetic field is the aura, what people call the aura.
No,
No?
I actually don't think so, because I can't
You don't think
measure
so?
an aura in the lab. I can measure the magnetic field.
Oh, okay.
Right. So an aura is probably more, there are people that are looking into that in what's called biofield research. Within the aura is probably more photonic.
Photonic.
Biophotons.
Yeah, there's there's a machine. Just I know this is beside, but there's a machine that actually can measure the aura, the Christian, or I don't remember. There's a machine for that.
Well, the ones that really do it scientifically are very sensitive photomultiplier tubes, measuring photons. Anyway, let's not go down that track. But
yeah, that will be
it'll take us off track. But mainly what I'm saying is we know the heart's field carries emotional information. We can measure that and accurately detect emotional state. Probably much more information's in that field that we don't yet know is there or how to decode it. So you can think of that as our personal field environment. So now studies have been done, independent, we've done them and independent of us as well, that show that when other people are around, not even within 3 feet, because the field goes farther than 3 feet, that's just the detection, the sensitivity of the instrument, right? We know magnetic fields go really forever, just at lower and lower magnitudes. But that show that when, like if you and I were together and one of us was in a coherent state, that is a measurably more coherent signal in the field. And then that can actually have a measurable effect on other people's physiology in a measurable way and lift them into a more coherent state if we're coherent. Or if we're in an incoherent state, right, it can also have, not so good effects. But we all know that. This is nothing new here. I mean, it's in our language, I'm sure you've heard the saying, the tension was so thick in the room, you could cut it with a knife. People talk about how they perceive and feel these things, right?
Yeah, I mean, we all perceive things, and I guess that we don't really put attention to it, or we don't really take it serious, because somehow has not been not well measured. But yeah, it's been well measured now. But
now it's measured. But anyway, this is just a stepping stone to the bigger story here.
Or disclosed.
Yeah. So I mean, we could do a whole interview just on this and the energetic communication that goes on between people and how our hearts can be in sync and not and all that. But so global coherence is taking this same concept, the same fact, of our heart's field and how it affects people in our local environment to the global scale. So I just have a brand new little prop here that somebody gave me. I said I need a prop and somebody sent me one. So this is Earth. So the Earth has a magnetic field, right? It's called the geomagnetic field, right? The North Pole, the South Pole, what our compasses tune into, right? All around the Earth, a toroidal shape. By the way, it's the same shape as the heart's field.
Like toroidal.
It's a toroidal shape. Yeah. So is the heart's field. You're a good student. You know this.
Anyway, I'm a freak. I'm a nerd.
I love it. So back in science class, way before you went to college, you probably got to dump iron flakes or iron filings on a glass plate, and then you put a magnet under it.
Oh, I didn't do it, but I did study the physics, the electrons change, and the formulation and all that.
You were deprived because it's a lot of fun. You move the magnet around.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Right. In fact, I have a 3D version of it here that sometimes I show. Yeah, of how they show the field. But here's my point. Those iron filings lined up in lines. It wasn't a homogeneous blob of black iron filings. They're in lines, right? That show you the shape of your magnetic field, whatever your magnet was.
Okay.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yes, say yes, because it's true. So
I just studied theoretically. I didn't do the actual experiment.
That's okay. I'll be teasing you more than I should be here, but here's the point. Those are called field lines, magnetic field lines. They're real things, or flux lines, we also call them. Here's what's wild. And I actually didn't realize this till much later. Even when I was in my electrical engineering studies, I didn't know this till later. That magnetic field, you can pluck a magnetic field line and it'll vibrate just like a guitar string.
The magnetic field will vibrate from the electrons interaction.
Well, yeah, but in this case for Earth, you have very long field lines coming out, around they're very long. So just like a guitar string.
I'm getting it. Okay, I'm getting where you want to.
Yeah, the length of the field line and the tension, just like on a guitar, regulates or controls its frequency that it vibrates at.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're plucking a string on a guitar, we know you can move your finger on the frets and change its note, right? The frequency it resonates at, it's resonant frequency, and we would call that a note, like C or D or whatever. Well, what's plucking the field lines of Earth is the solar wind rushing by at 1,000,000 miles per hour, and Earth is turning in that. So the field lines are being constantly plucked and are vibrating.
Okay, so
you with me?
So we humans, the same way, like
let me finish, because I think because I'll complete the story for you.
Okay.
So the magnetic field lines of Earth are vibrating.
Okay.
And we have a global network now to measure all around the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to do this and expensive, but we now have a globally interconnected, what's called the Global Coherence Monitoring System, that measures the Earth's magnetic frequencies.
Has something to do with the Schumann frequency?
I'm going to get there. No,
okay.
Not yet. These are called field line resonances. Now, these are actually more important than Schumann resonances.
Okay.
But a lot of people don't know about them. So the magnetic field lines of Earth are vibrating. Now, when we measure them down on her, in fact, I wish I had, if we were doing a presentation, I'd actually show you a picture of the vibrating field lines of Earth from a new satellite, from 5 satellites that NASA put up a few years ago that actually visualized the vibration of Earth's magnetic field lines. You can actually see it. It's really cool. So then when we measure them down on Earth, one of the primary resonant frequencies, and they're called field line resonances, that's actually the name of these things, is a frequency of 0.1 hertz.
Okay.
All right. Now, why am I talking about this? Well, 0.1 hertz is also the same frequency of the human heart rhythm when we're in a coherent state.
Oh, now, okay.
Okay. So
when we are in coherence, we get in coherence with the Earth frequency.
Yeah.
Okay.
The big one. Okay. Now, Schumann resonances, which you mentioned, is a completely different mechanism, much smaller in magnitude. It's almost like Schumann waves are like the brain of the human, and the field line resonances are like the heart. They're huge, and Schumann resonances are tiny in comparison.
Oh, wow.
Magnetically speaking. Okay, but Schumann resonances are magnetic waves that are traveling around the surface of the Earth, going around in all directions.
Okay.
And they're magnetic waves that get trapped between the surface of the Earth and the bottom of what's called the ionosphere.
Okay.
So the ionosphere is like a soap bubble around the planet.
Mm-hmm.
It's a highly ionized layer, dense, which is a plasma, as it's called, fourth state of matter in physics.
Yeah.
And one of the properties of plasma is they do special things when they interact with magnetic fields.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things is that low frequency magnetic waves, it's like a mirror. They bounce off the ionosphere. Right. So this is how, ham radio operators, people like talking to people in other countries. The way that works is you send up your radio signal, it hits the ionosphere and bounces off. So that's how people here in the US are talking to people in Spain or, or China. And you get a second, bounce.
Thank you for resolving this existential question that I had, but I was lazy enough to not to look for, but I was like, how would this really work? So then it goes to the ionosphere and it transfers from there.
It bounces off. It literally bounces off, right?
Yeah, I really would like to talk more about the plasma, not now, but in consecutive podcasts.
Okay, but anyway, so the point is that magnetic waves that get produced in this cavity between Earth and the ionosphere, if they fit the geometry, they become what are called globally propagating standing waves. Just means they're everywhere all the time. And a guy named Schumann or German mathematician, was the first to mathematically predict that these things had to exist.
Mm-hmm.
So they got named after him. So they're called Schumann resonances.
Just briefly, but regarding the Schumann resonance, a lot of people in the awakening community is taking the Schumann reference, the Schumann peaks, as a sign of increase of the magnetic field of the Earth, and
All
like
right.
a sign that we are
Yeah.
evolutionating. Is
Okay.
that something? Is that a thing or not?
No, it's utter nonsense.
Are nonsense? Okay.
And there's a lot of inaccuracy and a lot of noise, and especially in social media.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Okay. Now I can say this with confidence. I have the only globally connected network that's completely around the world. So I have sites in Saudi Arabia, Lithuania, South Africa, New Zealand, Canada, here in California, and well, should have had one in Colombia already. So I'm measuring this globally. So I can tell you with complete confidence that the Schumann resonances are the same today as they were when they were first measured in 1960.
Okay.
Now
Okay.
and I see the stuff that I won't mention names.
I have the app in my phone. I'm like, oh, look, the Schumann reference. But I was like, this is really a thing or not? So I'm glad that I'm asking you.
Yeah. So here's where people just don't understand Schumann resonances. First of all, the first fundamental frequency is 7.83 hertz. Okay, so that's the same as human brainwave, what we would call alpha or low alpha, kind of right between the transition between theta and alpha.
Yeah.
But there are 8 Schumann resonances.
Okay.
Not just one.
Oh, okay.
There are 8 of them, and they span the whole brainwave spectrum. So in other words, our brains and hearts are vibrating or oscillating at the same frequency as the two primary resonant frequencies of Earth.
I got okay. So yeah, now let's go back to be a little bit more less technical.
Okay.
And okay, so our brain and our heart is so the frequency of our head and our heart is, let's say, holographic like representation of the main two frequency of the air. Yeah, I know maybe that's not the word, but it's like they are parallel. They are similar representation.
Yeah, what you're saying is actually correct, but we don't have to go there. So now let's take it one more step, if I may.
Okay, sure.
It's a little bit technical, but not really. So tuning forks, everybody knows the 2 tuning fork example, right?
Yep.
You have 2 tuning forks to the same frequency. You tap one, a little hammer, and the other one starts to vibrate, right? If they're the same frequency.
And
So what that's called actually is, it's not just resonant. It's called resonance coupling. So
well, just want to let me tell you again. So yes, actually this is a thing I don't think many people knows it was. So when you have a tuning fork, you vibrate one, you put vibrating one, the other one which has not done any movement automatically captures the frequency even though they are separated, and they start vibrating at the same frequency.
Correct.
It's important.
Correct. So what you're transferring, in other words, when 2 systems oscillate at the same frequency, you can easily transfer energy and information between them through what's called resonance or resonant coupling.
So we are like human beings can be like tuning forks?
We are.
We are, yeah.
Not can be, we are. So the fact that our hearts and brains are vibrating at the same frequency of Earth, we have the basic physics to understand how we can transfer energy and information between our hearts and brains to the Earth's larger magnetic field.
So if we as a human beings start vibrating at a linear frequency, we can help to the vibration of the Earth, or how that goes?
Yeah, well, what I'm suggesting here is that so one of the things I'm going to invite our viewers to do here, I would usually wait a little bit, I'm going to do it now, is to pause throughout the day and ask yourself, what am I feeding the field?
This is such a powerful question.
Yes, what am I feeding the field? It's my local field, which is going to affect others, but I'm saying it's also the bigger global field that we're all contributing to all the time. So we're not just contributing to the field when we sit down and meditate or, go to church and pray, or it's all the time. So ask yourself how much of the field, how much am I feeding the field real heartfelt feelings of genuine compassion, love,
Actually,
kindness versus impatience, anxiety, fear. What I'm also saying is what we feed the field matters.
matters. This is a great idea and a great form of activism, because I'm pretty sure we all really want to help, and in some way we want to volunteer and we want to do things for others, which is great at a physical level if we can do it. But also,
That's
if
great.
you
And
want to
people should,
volunteer
yeah,
and you want to contribute to the highest good and you don't know how, just changing yourself, how you vibrate, you will
right.
apport that to the field. So it's really a thing.
You're right. Like, absolutely. So we're at a point now, I believe that we are a point in the evolution of consciousness, right now on Earth, that we are at a tipping point to make the next leap in
Yeah.
human consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But that is really, it's critical for that to happen, because what we feed the field really matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we feed the field with more love and compassion,
Absolutely.
which starts
And
at all of us individual cells in the greater wholeness. We all have to be vibrating. Now, we could do many talks, and there's a lot of research that suggests what I'm saying is not crazy. I mean, it's published in some pretty high-end journals.
actually, I really want to go a little bit through it, because the main reason of this podcast is that I do believe it's my we all believe that we are actually doing through this paradigm shift, this change, and this has to do can be justified from many different levels. But right now, from a scientific point of view, is there any justifications for this shift in consciousness that we are experiencing or
Well,
not?
I believe so. I mean, we are certainly showing. There's no question that we've already done this and published that when we're in a heart coherent state, that ultimately opens up a channel between I'm just going to call it our larger self, who we really are,
Yeah.
which is what really elevates consciousness. But
Mm-hmm.
that what we're putting out into the field down here in the body matters and has measurable effects on others. Okay, there's no question of that. That's not a hypothesis. That's been shown and replicated. Now, there's no question, absolutely no question, that the information or the quality of the vibrations in the Earth's field affects us. Hundreds of studies on this. Another one of my mentors, a guy named Franz Hallberg, did a lot of work. By the way, he's the guy who coined the term circadian rhythm.
The circadian rhythm, yeah, really?
Dr. Hallberg, he was another one of my close friends and mentors. I had a lot of really good, neat mentors in my life. Mention a couple. But anyway, many studies have been published showing that the activity and the quality of the frequencies of the Earth's field has profound effects on us. How we feel, how we behave. I mean, it goes on and on. Hospital admissions, many different factors. That's a given. We know this. So,
Yeah.
can we measure the radiations out of the magnetic field of the Earth from individuals? No, not yet. But it's clear that it happens, and there's to me anyway. And there's another probe or another scientific instrument that actually is able to measure this in a different way, and that's called the Global Consciousness Project.
Okay. I want to listen.
And that is a project that was started at Princeton University about a little over 20 years ago.
Okay.
And you could think of it, I think of it as a globally distributed, really neat scientific instrument. And it's basically comprised of physical devices that are designed to just spit out pure strings of random numbers. Okay, which is actually hard to do, by the way. So these are all time synchronized and sent back to a server at Princeton, and these are all around the world. And what that project has shown is that when something happens here on Earth that triggers a lot of people to have a similar emotion, that this global network, globally, right, is affected in a measurable way. A type of coherence is introduced. Now, this is where we have to kind of get into quantum effects because of the way these devices work, so that something is modulating the field in a way that can be measured. Now, my favorite study, I think the most important one actually that's been done after 20 years of research on this, many hundreds of events have been analyzed, is that events that have a lot of love and compassion in them are significantly have a greater impact on this instrument than those in low love and compassion.
I hope, because recently I have seen a lot of, not anger, revenge. I feel a lot of revenge energy around. Hopefully that doesn't have much effect.
Yeah, well, yeah, those are not good frequencies.
Finger crossed. A lot of revenge. I don't like it.
No, the problem we have right now on the planet is all the separation and the polarization.
Yeah.
And the raw hate, and anger because you think differently than I do. And it's crazy, but
and the things like we all believe so I am a human being and my ego, so I believe my things and may have deep convictions about things, but at the moment that my belief or the way I see life, I notice, and because I have a struggle with that and I am very stubborn, so but I make, okay, Amanda, the moment that your beliefs or the way I see life separates me from my fellow human beings, or I go against them, I stop. That nothing, any belief, nothing is really worth the compromise that love or that union with other human beings.
Perfect, agreed. Yeah, because we really have to move as society to compassion and compassionate latitude. In other words, people just need to talk. It doesn't mean they have to agree with each other.
No.
Right? You and I may not agree on some things, but it doesn't mean we can't be friends, and then I can't respect you and your opinions. And
I mean, I can argue a lot with my Amanda from 3 months ago and maybe disagree with her a lot. So I could have an argument with my Amanda from a few months ago and dislike her, honestly. So, so if I can experience that with myself, we are just different opinions, but we evolutionate.
But you can still have a heart connection, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I disagree a lot with my Amanda for time ago, and that's fine.
Sure. And that's fine. I mean, I'm certainly not saying everybody has to agree with each other.
Nope.
Or that one's better, worse, right, or wrong. It's just, but what we do need to move to is at least the ability to actually hear one another. And there's a lot of people, even as adults, who it's an unconscious perception that feel that to truly hear someone's point of view or hear what they're saying means that you have to agree with them.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it's not true, but it's an unconscious, right? It's part of that familiar, unfamiliar thing we were talking about earlier.
Oh, interesting. I couldn't think about it.
Yeah. But anyway, we've spent, well over an hour here. And
love, I'm just going to conclude saying that love is the great equalizer.
Exactly. And that's what we need to be feeding the field, this love and compassion.
Absolutely.
And that is what feeding the field has an effect on others, helps them wake up, help them become a little softer, a little kinder, maybe access their own heart's intelligence a little quicker than they would.
I'm just going to conclude with some practical objective reasons why it's so important that Heart Coherence. And for more information, I'm going to definitely remit people to Heart Institute webpage and also the links in YouTube, which are several about Heart Coherence. So basically is being able to modify a specifically neural pathway between our amygdala and our brain so that we become less fearful and more aligned with the
more composed.
We realize our pathways. Then we are also able to do some sort of better connections and influence in some way the emotions around or the frequency with others and have better relationships. And thirdly, we can do like some sort of voluntarism or activism by contributing to the magnetic field of the earth and contributing to a better humanity, more love.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all benefits.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. McCratty, for accepting to be interviewed by me and for sharing so much valuable information. If there is something else you would like to add, otherwise.
No, I think that's good. Just pause and ask yourself, what am I feeding the field? And if you find that it's more, not as coherent as you would like, do what we call heart focused breathing. Just breathe through the heart. Breathe a little slower and deeper than you normally would. And heart focus is important. Heart focused breathing. And then try and activate a feeling of kindness, appreciation, love, and radiate that out into your personal field environment and to others. That can be that simple. We can really shift our state that fast and that quick, but it takes some practice. And the hardest thing is remembering to do it.
Yeah. The power of the simple things that work.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it's been fun. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thank you.
All right, Amanda, good luck and with your education, your studies, and maybe we'll talk again one of these days.